In the whole grand story of computing, there's one name that always comes up when we talk about the very first program, Ada Lovelace. But is that really the whole picture? Today, we're going to dig into a story of absolute genius, incredible vision, and a historical debate that really sits at the very foundation of our digital world.
So, who wrote the first computer program? Seems like a pretty simple question, right? But oh man, the answer is anything but. When you think about programming, you're probably picturing, silicon chips and lines of Python or JavaScript, but this story starts way, way earlier, back in the age of steam and gears.
Yeah, for decades, the answer you'd almost always get is Augusta Ada King, Countess of Lovelace, or, as we know her, Ada Lovelace. She's celebrated as this amazing pioneer who saw the future in a machine that hadn't even been built yet. But as we're about to find out, that title, first programmer, well, that's just the beginning of a really fascinating debate.
To really get to the bottom of this, we've got to peel back the layers and look at what was happening back in the 1840s. Was Ada Lovelace this lone visionary who just invented programming out of thin air, or was she part of a much bigger, more complicated collaboration? Let's find out. See, the first computer program couldn't exist without the idea of a computer. And the computer in this story isn't some sleek laptop. Nope. It was a theoretical, steam-powered giant made of brass and iron, the brainchild of a brilliant inventor. So let's meet the other key player here, Charles Babbage. He's often called the father of the computer, and for good reason. He designed this revolutionary device he called the Analytical Engine, a machine that could, in theory, calculate pretty much anything you could throw at it.
And this is what's so wild. Look how far ahead of its time this thing was. Babbage's design had a mill for doing the calculations, which is exactly what a modern CPU does. It had a store to hold numbers, which is basically our RAM. And how did it get instructions? From punched cards, just like early computers. It was literally a blueprint for the modern computer more than a century early.
Okay, so this is where Ada Lovelace comes into the picture. An Italian engineer wrote an article about Babbage's engine. Lovelace, who was this incredibly gifted mathematician and a good friend of Babbage, was asked to translate it into English. But here's the kicker. She didn't just translate it. She added her own notes, which ended up being almost 3 times longer than the original article. And it's in these notes, specifically the very last one, Note G, that we find the heart of her claim to fame. This is where the magic really happens.
So check this out. What you're looking at right here, this is the evidence itself. This table from Note G shows the step-by-step instructions the analytical engine would need to follow to calculate a really complex sequence of numbers, the Bernoulli numbers. This isn't just a math formula. It's what we'd call an execution trace today. It's a detailed plan for a machine. What she created was, in essence, an algorithm. Think of it like a recipe. It's not about guessing or intuition. It's a super precise, repeatable set of steps that, if you follow them perfectly, you'll get the same exact result every single time. That is the soul of programming.
And her method demonstrated ideas that are, absolutely fundamental to coding today. She broke a giant problem down into smaller, manageable pieces. She understood you had to store values in memory as you went. And, crucially, she described a way to repeat instructions. This wasn't just math, this was pure computational thinking.
And this idea of looping? It was totally revolutionary. Instead of writing the same instructions out 1,000 times, you could just tell the machine, hey, go back and do that part again. Every single programmer uses loops all the time today. Ada Lovelace was talking about this concept over 100 years before it became a standard thing. Incredible.
But here is where Lovelace's genius just takes off into the stratosphere. She took a conceptual leap that even Babbage himself hadn't quite put into words. She saw that this machine could be way more than just a fancy calculator.
She came up with this amazing metaphor. She said the engine could weave patterns with algebra, just like a loom weaves patterns with thread. She got it. She understood that if a machine could manipulate numbers, which are really just symbols, then it can manipulate any symbols, as long as you define the rules.
Think about this. She was imagining a future where these machines could compose music, create art, and process language, not just solve math problems. This was basically the birth of the idea of general-purpose computing. She wasn't just looking at the machine. She was seeing what it could become.
So at this point, it all seems like a pretty open and shut case, right? Ada Lovelace, first programmer. But, history's never quite that simple. In the last few decades, historians have dug up some new details that kind of complicate the story. Okay, so let's break down the arguments.
The case for Lovelace is strong, right? She published the first complex algorithm. And maybe even more importantly, she's the one who explained what it all meant for the future. But then you look at Babbage's side of things. Historians have found his old notebooks, and guess what? They contain over 20 programs he wrote himself, some from years before Lovelace's famous notes. It shows their work was this deep, intense collaboration. It's almost impossible to see where his ideas stopped and hers started.
So where does that leave us? Does this new information diminish Lovelace's role? Or does it just help us see a clearer, more nuanced picture of what her true legacy really is?
You know, maybe that title, First Programmer, is the wrong way to look at it. The job didn't even exist back then. What we can say for sure is that Lovelace's notes were the very first publication to explain to the world what we now call software. She didn't just write a program, she defined the whole practice of programming, this careful, documented process of telling a machine what to do.
Her visionary work was largely forgotten for about a century, but as the real computer age finally dawned, pioneers rediscovered her paper. And that discovery led to a very real, very powerful tribute in the year 1979.
That's right, the U.S. Department of Defense, we're talking about a serious institution here, was creating this new, incredibly powerful and reliable programming language for all of its critical systems. Think airplanes, defense tech, the whole shebang. And what did they name it? They named it Ada. It was the perfect way to cement her legacy right into the fabric of modern technology.
Which brings us right back to our big question. Maybe who was technically first is less important than who saw the future. Lovelace's real, undeniable genius might not have been in writing just one algorithm, but in being the first person to truly understand the vast, creative, world-changing potential of a programmable machine. And that is a legacy that no one can dispute.